This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored by Manolatus Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. M&M brings decades of experience and their vast network to you. The firm develops insightful strategies and cost-effective tactics to help clients achieve their goals and connect to those who matter most. M&M specializes in media relations, community engagement, crisis communications, and cross-platform marketing. Learn more at mnmadpr.com.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego, and joined by Andrew Keatts, our assistant editor.
What's up?
And Sara, Libby, our managing editor.
Hello.
You guys, thank you for staffing the ship last week. Andy?
Yes. They always say that on ships, staffing the ship. It's like
That's how they say it.
Yeah,
Get up there
On
the
a
helm.
ship.
On the helm.
It's like a temp firm.
Coming up on the show today, President Trump was in San Diego, right up here. He wanted to, he was considering stopping by the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio, just had some other business. City Council President Georgette Gomez has made her big decision. She is going to go for Congress and give up everything she built in like 9 months at the city. And on the second half of the show, we have a special guest, San Diego Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. We've had her on before, but she has a lot going on right now. She's decided to take a break from taking the flack on social media and passing big legislation. So we're going to talk to her about that. So we have a lot to discuss. First, POTUS was here. He was right over there at the Grant.
Yeah, I saw him. I was like 4 or 5 feet from him.
Yeah, he said, "Hey, what's up, Keatts?"
I just kind of looked at him, and then he drove by, and then I just turned and walked as though like nothing had happened in my life.
Well, you guys lived in D.C. or were around D.C., so you're accustomed to these kinds of things, right?
Sorta.
Yes and no. I feel like even in DC, like if Marine One flies by, you're like, hey, there it is. It's still exciting, even there.
Yeah. All right. So he was here for 3 days. Now, one guy wrote me, and he's like, you guys have to cover this more. And I was like, why? Like, there's so many reporters covering this. NBC, UT, everybody gave it their whole staff.
If that person feels better, I remember getting a lot of very angry emails when Bernie Sanders did a rally in San Diego that we did not cover it, which, again, is not a thing that we do.
So he did a fundraiser downtown. I heard he made like $15 million or raised $15 million in California in general.
I was struck yesterday in like one of those take a step back and just observe the situation that is the way it is. So you're accustomed to it, so nobody questions it. But like, it was awfully disruptive to the downtown world yesterday.
Yeah.
Like at one point I saw 6 MTS buses back to back to back to back on A Street.
Yeah.
Because of all the street closures and what have you. And it's to step back and say that that's happening because of a private fundraising endeavor is, I don't want to stop it necessarily, but I do think it is a remarkable aspect of our political system that like the entire downtown area of a major American city was disrupted by a full day so a man could raise $15 million for a political campaign.
15 from the state, but yes.
Okay. Well, that's good.
A few million probably here. I don't know. So, yes, that is, yeah.
No, it's like the cost of democracy whenever there's like a rally or something and things get all upset. Like, I don't think that it's good for people to like, clutch their pearls about how disruptive that is. But it is like, boy, it was awfully disruptive.
How mad would people have been if that would have been a protest that shut down downtown? That would have been a big deal. You're right.
And it wasn't. He wasn't delivering a policy address. He wasn't.
Right.
Later he went to the border.
Doing
the presidency. Right. Exactly.
So we wanted to collect a couple of his Trumpisms from the week though. Or from the day in San Diego. So I think this one was the office-wide hit. He went to the wall and he said it was specially designed though to burn people, I think was his point. And
that didn't even occur to me. That's what he was trying to get across.
And so he wanted to illustrate just how hot it was designed to be.
Plus, it's designed to absorb heat, so it's extremely hot. The wall is, you won't be able to touch it. You can fry an egg on that wall. It's very, very hot.
So
we're gonna you've seen Jurassic Park, right? You know the electrified fences. That's what we have,
right? So
like Running Man. Have you guys seen Running Man?
We got a special team together. It's going to go down and fact check that. I'm hoping for some video.
I feel like we're about to see a lot of like hot new artisanal like tacos with a fried egg on it that have like some tongue-in-cheek name, like the Trump border wall taco.
Yeah,
carne
it could be
asada
like
and a fried
it could be all
egg.
like stretched out egg. Yeah.
You've really got your like finger on the pulse of the artisanal taco.
Yeah, I'm here to consult for your restaurant endeavors, by the way.
Yeah, wow, that would be a great job. All right, the next one, similar vein. He got to talking, and there was a top military official nearby, a little bit worried about what he was talking about.
That you could do, and one thing we haven't mentioned is technology. They're wired so that we will know if somebody's trying to break through, and you may want to discuss that a little bit, General.
Sir, there could be some merit in not discussing that.
Okay? I like that. That was a great answer. I'll just tell you they're wired, okay? They're wired.
All right. That's
diplomatic. There may be some merit in not discussing
Could
that.
you say it better if you're a general? It's genius. It's really impressive.
To Trump's credit, he recovered from that very well.
Very well.
Like, wow, you just humiliated me completely, and let's move on.
Yeah. He has a good stage presence. You gotta give him that. All right. All right, moving on. We got a little bit of an update for those fans of the podcast. You will note that we drove up the drama as much as we could on this particular issue at City Hall. Mayor Kevin Faulconer Tuesday announced that he'd veto the City Council's new policy on inclusionary housing. That's the proposal led by Council President Georgette Gomez to increase the fee that developers pay when they want to avoid building low-income or units reserved for low-income residents in their developments. They're required to. If they don't want to, they can pay this fee. That fee would have gone up, and it would have also obligated them to build units for people with lower incomes than previous requirements. So Gomez, remember, on this show, threatened that if he vetoed it, she would put at risk his beloved campaign for a hotel room tax increase that is on the March ballot, that he has built this coalition for, left, right, center, business, all of that. He's so excited to get that done, and she threatened it. So, will she be able to unravel it?
Well, I still don't know what it would entail to do it.
So I think that here's the thing.
I guess that means my answer is no, because I don't know what it looks like. But
the way I pictured it is, as council president, she was such a powerful figure that she could methodically go through her labor allies and others and say, you need to pull off this, you need to not donate this or that, and you need to step back from your consultants helping this get done. That would seem like that would be the way it would get done. But she also announced last week she's running for Congress, which means she's leaving all of those positions that she's built up over the last several months in the city. Mm-hmm. Council president, chair of MTS.
Sandag board member.
She's
not leaving them today. She's leaving them in a year and 3 months or something.
I think that the political system is vicious to so-called lame ducks, though, right?
So do you think she will not be council president come December?
I think there's a good chance she won't be.
Interesting. Okay. I hadn't actually thought of that.
I think there would be reasonable concern if a rival wanted to make the case that, like, hey, she can't pay attention.
I think there's a good chance that she might not be MTS chair come January, because that is a position that changes over relatively often, and hers would have been a long stay in it had she carried through. And now that she's presumably going to be focused on her own congressional campaign more so than the MTS ballot measure campaign, it might make sense to put somebody else in that position.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that there are kind of two questions here. One is, what would she actually do to carry out that threat? And the second is, what of these various priorities that she's established is she actually going to give her all to now that she's also running a congressional campaign? Because like you said, the MTS ballot measure, she has said, was her number one priority.
Yeah.
And it's unclear whether that's still going to be the case.
Yeah. Now, other people have run. Carl DeMaio famously ran a mayoral campaign in tandem with a pension reform measure. And this isn't a perfect analog for that because those were two City of San Diego full voting jurisdiction of the City of San Diego. This would be the imperfect match. But I guess you could maybe see her still running a congressional campaign on like a transportation and environment platform that sort of drifts off of the momentum of a MTS ballot measure.
So who had Gomez in our draft of candidates?
I did.
Yeah. Well, that's...
but you had Sarah Jacobs, who's running.
That's 2 points for you, right?
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jay. So I'm still winless, right?
You're the first person you drafted. You said, I don't think this person is going to run.
I thought you drafted Raquel Vasquez.
I did.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, she is running.
She is running, I think.
Right.
So we're all good.
Yeah.
We're good at our jobs.
Oh, good.
So Gomez formally announced she's running, and she joins an interesting group of congressional candidates from San Diego who don't live in the districts they're running in. Carl DeMaio's running in the 50th Congressional District. He does not live there. Darrell Issa, likely running in the 50th.
Seems like it.
He doesn't live there. And in the 53rd, Gomez, who we just talked about, Georgette, she doesn't live in the district either. And whoever wins will join Juan Vargas, who represents the 51st in South Bay, even though he doesn't live in the district. Mm-mm. So is San Diego now one big congressional district that the Republicans and Democrats just divvy out no matter where they live?
I guess so. I mean, in fairness, each of these people lives like a mile max.
Does it matter?
From it. I don't know. I mean, Vargas literally lives like 4 blocks from the district.
But I think the more telling thing is the crossover in terms of like how many of them have run for other districts. So like Carl DeMaio has run for a separate district. Darrell Issa used to represent a different district. Sarah Jacobs ran in a different district.
And flirted with a run in a third district.
Yeah. So they're just all like, we can run wherever we want. So it's not
Scott's
a thing
point,
that matters anymore.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And it is interesting that within those campaigns, like the districts become defined like culturally in a specific way.
Yeah.
Like when Carl ran against Scott Peters, he was constantly talking about how he was a different Republican, a California Republican who was a staunch environmentalist, and he was pro-choice. And I don't think those are going to be the types of things we hear.
You don't think he's going to talk about that
with
Darrell Issa and Duncan Hunter?
No, and I don't think so. I think he's probably going to talk about like guns.
Lots
for
of
instance,
guns.
You know?
Lots of guns.
And he lived in the same home in both of those campaigns.
But the district's not insignificant. Like Georgette Gomez's base, if you were to call it, arguably is like the City Heights area, right?
Yeah.
If not just obviously the City Heights area. And that most of that neighborhood can't vote in that district.
Yes.
So that's not insignificant as far as how it might play out.
I think partially this is just because congressional districts are quite big. But somebody told me that the specific overlap of her city council district to the congressional district is like less than 10% of voters in the congressional district.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so a lot to watch for with that race. We'll have to decide how much attention to give it. It's obviously captured a lot of attention. We'll even ask Lorena Gonzalez about her take on it and why she didn't want to run for it. But first, Andy had a little bit of a story this week. San Diego Police Department lowered their standards in order to clear a backlog of rape kits. So let's talk about the rape kits we're talking about. What is the issue here, and what did you find out?
So every time there is a sexual assault, a specifically trained nurse, when a victim comes forward to report it, collects evidence from that victim's body, looking for evidence, basically, and specifically looking for DNA evidence from the suspect, from the attacker. That information is put into a single kit, and that kit is impounded as a piece of evidence connected to that case with the crime lab that is associated with whatever police department it takes place in.
So that's what we call a rape kit.
Yes, or a sexual assault response team kit.
And so years ago, we looked at this issue, and a lot of people debated this issue because it was revealed that there were thousands of these kits in various jurisdictions that had never been tested. Yes. And San Diego was actually highlighted as one of those with the most.
Yeah, and San Diego was highlighted in two ways. One, it had some of the most in its untested backlog, but at the time that was identified, this was a state audit that identified 3 different departments that had a lot of untested kits. The others, Oakland and Sacramento, almost immediately said, we are going to start testing all of those kits. San Diego came back and said, we are not going to start testing all those kits, and in fact, it's a waste of time to do so.
Yes, and so I think that's important because they are very unique in this whole nationwide discussion, in that so many police departments across the country have these backlogs, but most of them say we just don't have the resources to test them all. And that's why there have been all these like independent grants and legislators moving resources around to get them the resources so that they have the money to test all the kits. And SDPD says it's not about the money. We just don't think it's a good use of our time.
Yes, specifically. They're not alone necessarily. There is good faith disagreement about whether this is a good thing to do. The general argument against their position is that this is all evidence, and the more you test, the more you can potentially build a DNA database that can track backwards for cold cases and look for serial predators that are operating, serial rapists essentially, that are operating in different jurisdictions and getting away with it as a result. And not only to look back at previous cold cases, but potentially to plant a potential evidence in the kit for future crimes that have not yet been committed.
Yeah. One thing I would just add to that is that I think it's reasonable to assume that when somebody undergoes this procedure to collect all of this evidence on your body after having gone through probably the worst experience of your life, that victim probably expects that they're going to be tested.
That is true. There are some cases that victims advocates have discussed about people who have moved on with their life and don't want it to be brought up again, and they've
just
moved
want
on.
To close that
It's
door.
been 10 years of their life and they're done with it, and that is something that victims advocates discuss a lot, about having to treat that delicately.
Okay, the point is that debate was resolved, and the police department lost, and the city and the state decided, we are going to test all those kits.
Yes.
And yet you have discovered what?
My reporting discovered that a specific category of kits that were in the department's backlog, they categorize all of these different kits that they have not tested for a certain set of acceptable reasons. One of them, for instance, is that the DA declined to prosecute. Now, the DA could have declined to prosecute for any number of reasons, but in any case, that's the bucket that they're sitting in. And so those kits, specifically, the crime lab management told their analysts in March that they were not going to test those kits to the same standard that they test other kits. Typically, the crime lab analysts were taking 6 swabs from these kits, testing those 6 and looking for DNA specifically from 3 of them. So you would kind of screen them and then look for DNA in 3 of them. They would said that in this other category of kits, we'll just pull 1 swab and we'll test only that 1 swab. And moreover, they wouldn't only test 1 swab, they would test the same swab exclusively. And in fact, the analysts were told explicitly that they had no discretion whatsoever in which swab was tested. So a swab is going to be pulled from different parts of the victim's body, and often analysts would be expected to exercise some sort of discretion around which swab was going to be most probative based on the nature of the assault. So potentially somebody got bit by their assailant, and that happened on their chest. You could pull the chest swab. They had some research backing it. It was that the swab that most often came back with a DNA match was from the external genital area. And they said, you will always test the external genital swab, period. Now, that is not, there is some empirical research behind that. But of course, if there's no allegation of contact with the person's genitals, it doesn't necessarily make sense. But in this case, they would still be restricted to test only that swab. And
that's insane.
Yes.
Like, let's just acknowledge
yes,
that
and so,
if somebody is assaulted in a different area, that area wouldn't be tested.
Yes, if they were forced to orally copulate a male and there was an oral swab, that you would not test the oral swab. You would test a genital swab where there was no allegation of contact with the genital.
And one of the technicians that you spoke with, all of whom requested anonymity because of what they were risking, the most damning part of your piece, I think, was when that one person said this was to check a box.
Yeah, all 5 of them specifically said, actually, that this was being done to check a box, that was said not just once, that was said many times. It was said in meetings. It was said in one-on-one interactions. It was said by supervisors. It was said by other analysts.
And the second most damning part of the story, I guess, as well, is when you first started asking about them, they communicated to their team to go back to the old way.
Yes, and that going forward, if they came up with any more of these cases that were declined to prosecute cases, they would test them in the full 6 swab method going forward.
Okay, so you can check that out. It was an excellent story, as in Keatts' trademark thorough style. Very well done. So check it out. It's going to be an object of discussion, I think, at the City Council and the leadership of the city. On the other side of the break, we'll have Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, who represents South Bay and San Diego in Sacramento. Her bill, AB 5, was just signed into law, and it is as big a deal as I've seen go through Sacramento. We'll talk about it, and we had a lot to get through. It's a long interview, but I think it's worth it. A lot of different things, from vaccinations to the workers' law to what she thinks the future of local congressional seats should look like. Stay with us. All right, we are joined, all 3 of us, in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio by Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, future Secretary of State candidate Lorena Gonzalez, not congressional candidate Lorena Gonzalez, and not Hurricane Lorena Gonzalez. Welcome.
Thank you for that clarification.
It's a good introduction.
We all needed that.
Yeah. Well, welcome. So just a normal couple weeks for you then?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
End of session,
Yeah.
Crazies come out.
So let's just dive in. And there's so many issues to talk about. The biggest issue, probably one of the most transformative and interesting bills to go forward in the state legislature, AB 5, which broadly sort of codified a California Supreme Court ruling about when somebody can be considered an independent contractor versus when an employer needs to make them an employee. Now, there's a lot going on there, but the major one was this new test that the court put in. And the major one of that was this second part of the test, which said that if you're doing the job that business does, like, say, if you're a reporter doing journalism for a journalism entity, then you cannot be an independent contractor. You should be an employee. Now, you put in a bunch of exemptions, made sure it was clear, and then you got this thing through, and it's done. He signed it.
It's done.
So what did you learn? We got a lot of different questions, but did you learn a lot about how the economy works? Because I feel like I did. I
learned how many people are misclassifying employees, and that was a little disheartening. On top of that, how many people work and conduct themselves like true independent small businesses. So I think I learned both of those, and trying to distinguish between the two was the challenge of the bill, right? It's to try to kind of hit a sweet spot that's not going to be perfect, but that is going to hopefully do more good than bad.
Yeah, we first started talking about this with the case of freelance journalists. And you ended up building in some exemptions that allow for some of the things I was most worried about. For example, like people just starting in the industry and selling some of their first work. Some people that might just do some photography here and there, allowing them to participate. But you basically made the determination, if I'm not wrong, that if they're doing something every day or every week for a publication, they should probably be a part-time or full-time employee.
Yeah, journalism was one of the most interesting, I think, and I spent, I mean, not to suggest, of course, it's not important. It is important, but given how many workers there are in that field compared to other, I spent a disproportionate amount of time per worker that I was dealing with, I would say, on that subject. But it was interesting because there were such strong feelings on both sides. And unfortunately, I think it was easy to get it out of perspective because those people who were independent contractors and happy, freelancers and happy, were very honest on social media and constantly on social media beating me up about it. And the people who either were freelancers or are currently who were not happy about it felt the need to hide that. And I don't know if it was social pressure, peer pressure. They thought they'd lose their job. They thought they would lose jobs. So I got tons of private messages and stories that people would say, but you can't repeat this. And I'm like, okay, well, this is getting hard. And then we had an interesting thing that's happening in a lot of newsrooms, and that's the revitalization of unions in newsrooms. And so we had opinions coming out of some of those places as well about not allowing just an exemption that would provide for a bad manager to break a union or to really keep an organizing effort from going forward. So it was a tough one. And I really was trying to strive for balance on that.
I actually think it's great what you just said because that's a very journalistic experience to have public people screaming at you and their counterparts secretly saying like, actually, by the way, good job. That's actually right. You're fine.
Off the record.
That's something
that happened to me too.
That's kind of my experience dealing with public agencies, for instance.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we get it a little bit, but this was pretty stark until near the end. I think there was one local reporter who's like, "Okay, let me tell you my story," and I think it kind of made some of the people who had been public pause a little. Like
it was Aaron Bergen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for so long in this debate for the journalism aspect, we were talking about freelancers, but then what seemed like the 11th hour, this whole other aspect of it, which is newspaper delivery workers, seemed to surface. I don't know, maybe it was present for you the entire time, but it actually resulted in you having to craft this compromise that you yourself didn't actually support or vote for. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So, it was easy to work on the freelance aspect because if you read the Dynamex decision, and people always have to know that I was trying to stay true to the Supreme, it was a bipartisan, unanimous Supreme Court decision. And if you read the Dynamex decision, they really go through their thought process in it. And it's what we tried to use when trying to figure this whole, and I don't even like to call it exemption because everybody has rules if they're still under Borrello, if not the old test. So, we really kind of went through that. And so when newspaper carriers came up, and they did with the publishers, months ago, I just kind of nodded my head because if you read the Dynamex decision, they're exactly the type of workers that Dynamex seeks to protect. And if you look at court cases dealing with newspaper carriers, they've flooded the courts. They've lost time and time again under Borrello. There's current ones going on.
You mean carriers suing their companies?
Yeah, there's over 562 claims currently that were filed under Dynamex, but probably will survive under Borrello because it's just so, it's low income. And one of the factors that we used a lot was the barriers to employment. The higher the barrier to employment in any field, the more likely that person has leverage and bargaining power. And so you worry less about the rules of labor, quite frankly, because, then there is some freedom of choice, if you will, or somebody's doing something because they can actually negotiate their own rates. So, we were talking about with newspaper carriers, really very little to none barrier to employment. Basically, you just had to have a car. And knowing personally some of the men and women who have done this job, I just thought that it would be ridiculous to exempt them. And so I held strong to that throughout the entire process until I couldn't.
I want to unravel this one because I think it also is illustrative of the whole bill and the whole effort. And I want to ask you about it. So we're talking about people. So I had a newspaper route. A lot of people had a newspaper route. It's changed since we did. There, like you said, they act as independent contractors, often working for a separate company, correct?
Sometimes, and sometimes directly for the paper. There's two different kinds.
Okay, so I guess my question is, and I think this helps maybe understand the broader debate, is at what point could they legitimately be independent businesses that you wouldn't want to force into an employment relationship? I mean, maybe there is a company that could form around distributing newspapers. At what point is it going to cross over into a company that you can support? And at what point is it just a worker misclassified?
Well, there are businesses that distribute newspaper that pay their workers as employees, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there is nothing in AB5 or Dynamex that prevents a newspaper from contracting with a small business that delivers their newspaper. What it prevents is this kind of weird relationship where publishers, I guess I should say, and distributors both know that they're misclassifying individuals who they're 1099. And this is important too, because the way our labor laws are written, these are folks who have to work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we actually have laws in place that suggest that you shouldn't have to work 7 days a week and 365 days a year unless you're getting double time, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. So they're skirting a lot of the wage and hour laws by doing this. And some of the stories we were hearing at the end were just atrocious. You know, a newspaper delivery woman was talking about having to pay the company $100 if she missed a day. $1 if she missed a house. So these are folks that have been they're not represented. Obviously, there's no union for newspaper carriers. That went by with Newsies, in the 1930s probably. And these are folks that we don't see often. And I always think it's scariest to discount the workers we don't see. And a lot of the work I do is with exactly those type of workers. If we talk about janitors or hotel workers or folks who work when we're sleeping or who work when we're not present there, are the easiest to really exploit.
So going forward, obviously the bill just passed about a week ago and was just signed this week. I've been a little surprised that I've already started to notice campaign messaging from Republicans about this bill, even when it's not tied to you directly. So I saw, Brian Mainshine's opponent, for example, say Brian Mainshine voted for this worker contracting bill and therefore vote him out of office. Obviously, there's a ballot measure going forward that would seek to undo it. How do you respond to this maybe laying the groundwork for Republicans to have something to be galvanized about in 2020?
I suppose the only polling I've seen on it suggests that Californians 2-1 support the bill. So it was a quick poll. It was done around the gig economy. And so, it's interesting, I guess, but it's pretty typical of Republicans to say, government shouldn't interfere and protect workers. I also think we got to be careful when we say it's clearly they're going to be an initiative, because they put money into a bank account to threaten an initiative. Maybe they do promote initiative, and it'll be interesting. An initiative is different than a referendum. I don't think the interesting thing about the bill is if you referendize it, you still have the Dynamex decision in place. The law is the law. The bill actually provides more clarity and exemptions than Dynamex does. And so I don't think that there are a lot of folks out there looking to referendize AB5. What you might get is an initiative with carve-outs for just the gig economy, and that's dangerous. But it's a discussion I'm willing to have. I think it's an important discussion about the future of workers and what we see as the future of workers for us, our kids, and everybody.
So when you had people like software engineers or something that they do want to work independently, they didn't necessarily get the specific exemption they were hoping for, or some didn't. And what can you tell them if they want to work independently? How do they get to that line of they're a business or something that can be independent? What are you asking for them to do?
Get a business license, really operate like a business. what happens, and it's not one person, right? And so there's exemptions for professional services in the bill. And I'm trying to remember if software engineer is one of the specific ones, but there are a number of listed professional services that kind of meet that guideline, like I said, of a higher barrier to entry that can negotiate for themselves. But it also requires that we formalize our economy some. It's important that people do act like true businesses and play by the rules, because what'll happen if not is I'm a software engineer and I really like my gig. I'm an independent contractor, but suddenly I've got too many jobs for me. So my buddy over here is going to come work for me and he's going to be my independent contractor now. And then, I'm going to hire one other person. Well, pretty much you're running in the underground economy then. And that's a problem. And so we have to standardize what has become a habit, maybe a bad habit of some folks in kind of the untraditional economy. And I think that's fine.
What's bad about that though?
Well, it leads to abuses, right? So now I have four people who work in my little office here. Maybe it's my house, and they're working as independent contractors. And now I need somebody to answer the phones to schedule. And pretty much, so
you're telling them what to do as if they're an employee,
yes.
And they don't have the employee benefit.
And they don't have that same skill set that they can negotiate for themselves and stuff. So you're like, well, I'm just going to hire someone to answer the phones, but I'm already doing 1099s for everybody, and that does happen. It happens a lot, and so. A lot of what we're doing, I think, with AB5, and people are freaked out, but this is the law. A lot of people have been not playing by the rules, and that's kind of scary. You know?
That came up so often. I'd watch somebody make an argument against this, and I'd be like, what you're saying that you're doing is already something they've warned me against with the current law to not do.
Even pre-Dynamex,
right,
like
that's what
under
I mean.
Barella.
Yeah,
some guy yesterday, and it was interesting on Twitter, just went off on me, and it was like the F-bomb, and he's going on. And
on Twitter?
I know,
language?
That's terrible. I use it, but like directed at me, and he's like, well, I have 18 people who work for me, and I'm thinking, that's kind of a lot. And then he goes on to say he has Airbnbs, and these 18 people are housekeepers, and I was like, dude, get yourself an attorney, because you've been breaking workers' comp rules for quite a while now. But this doesn't have anything to do with AB5. You're just learning the fact that you're possibly breaking the law. So I think one of the things we have to do is do a better job of educating people. And one of the things we've committed to doing is asking for a budget allocation and having GoBiz really work with some of these programs that help people become small businesses, help them abide by the law without having to hire an attorney.
From a national perspective, this law got a lot of attention specifically because of its impact on the gig economy. And we've touched on that, but mostly hasn't been the main thrust of our conversation here. Were you surprised, or had it been something that had been indicated to you already when Uber came forward and said, we actually think this is fine because we're not fundamentally a transportation company, we're a platform, or whatever the heck their explanation was?
Well, they never said this is fine.
Okay.
They lobbied hard against
yes.
They put $30 million
yes,
into a bank account. If something's fine and doesn't apply to you, don't usually stick $30 million somewhere. But okay.
Let's go through this a little bit. It was a little more interesting. They said they were characterized as they weren't going to comply, and they said no, we'll comply, and we're going to comply and say that our drivers are just a side element of our main business, which is to provide a platform. And that's just it struck everybody as absurd, but I think that's a lot of what all of these companies say, is that they are just the software infrastructure on which this independent commerce can happen. And you said that's bullshit, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they're going to have to wrestle with that. Do you think that's just headed immediately to court? Or?
Well, what? And it wasn't the first, when he said it the day that passed the assembly, I think on a conference call, wasn't the first time I'd heard Tony West say it. In fact, Tony West had said it in my office a few weeks beforehand. And he said it, and I looked at him like he was crazy. And I said, you really believe that? And he said, that's our legal position. And I was like, that's just really shitty. I said, so you're just going to litigate this. And that has been their approach to a ton of lawsuits, right? To litigate, to do arbitration, to settle lawsuits. And so that they don't really, that's cheaper for them, they think, or less risky than abiding by the law.
Well, even pre-AB5, like it's move fast and break things is the mantra of Silicon Valley. And Uber kind of famously, the story of their rise was go to these markets,
break the law
ahead of time, right?
Before there's a law or whatever.
Before there's a law, go and countries. They did this all over the world.
Yep.
And get your consumer base so big that now you've got a demand for your platform that forces lawmakers to work to help to write a law around you,
right,
as opposed to asking for permission first,
right, and moving from one sphere to the next, right? I mean, they're not going to be in the individual driver business forever, and we know that their business plan lays out autonomous vehicles. They'd like to get rid of the guy in the car, or woman, but they say the guy in the car.
It was
flying cars.
So
and
they kind of believe, if they can wait it out through court cases, that they're better off. So when he told me that, I was like, all right. So I gathered my staff and some other folks, smart people we had been working with, some labor attorney, some strategists. And I said, this is just so unsettling, to have a $1 billion company come in and say, you can write whatever you like because we're not going to abide by it. Mm-hmm. It's just, as a lawmaker, you're kind of like, it kind of feels like the president, right? When the president's like, I don't care what the law is. It's a dangerous place for politics to go in. It's a dangerous place for government to be. And so we sat around, and that's why, in fact, at the last set of amendments, we added an amendment to allow city attorneys to seek injunctive relief. I know our city attorney, I know the city attorney in San Francisco, and they're not shrinking violets, and they are willing to take on some of these legal questions. And I think they have really serious views about companies that break the law. And so
do you use
we added
Uber?
that in. Oh, on occasion, sure.
So you don't have like a moral problem with the company?
I try to make sure, yes, I do, but I use it and tip the worker.
Right.
I have an ability to provide more for the driver, and so I do that.
Right.
And I try to do it in cash because I'm never sure, and some of the platforms don't. They take their tips, and so I try to do it in cash. If not, I do large tips, and I'm very clear about it. It also has provided me a way to learn about the industry for years. I don't use it a ton. I just don't have a need to. But talking to drivers is how I found out the changes in the company.
Georgette Gomez announced last week she's running for Congress. Sarah Jacobs announced. There's a few people jumping in here and there. That's a big seat. It's the kind of seat that's not open very often. You jumped right away and said, I'm not running. Stop calling me about it.
The gossip circles.
Is that still ridiculous. The case, by the way?
Absolutely. Well, now that session's over, kind of thinking about it now.
Do you support Georgette? Do you think she made the right choice with that?
I do support Georgette. I was hopeful that she would run for my seat when I was done. I want somebody to replace me who is bold and progressive and fearless and willing to continue to work on behalf of individuals and our constituents who I don't feel like always had a strong voice for them. And I thought Georgette fits the bill. So when she said she was going to run for Congress, that's great too. And so I'm supportive of her efforts. Absolutely.
Can I ask you about an ad that ran in the mayor's race locally? There's a Instagram ad from Barbara Bree. She's running for mayor. She's on the city council. She it depicts her as a cartoon superhero standing over these homes, and she's got her hands on her hips, superhero style. And there are three big hands that she's blocking. They're coming out. One is
they're reaching into the neighborhood.
Yeah, they're reaching in. She's standing firm against them. One of them says speculators on it. The other one says short-term vacation rentals. And then the third is Sacramento. And then it has a quote, and it says, Barbara Bree is defining herself as the protector of single-family homes in San Diego. And so that's what she's protecting. It was a very interesting cartoon as we have this debate about whether she really is, trying to fight for single-family homes and all they represent and just preserve them. Or is she just trying to look for a nuanced vote? And the one I wanted to ask you about is this hand that's the Sacramento hand. I don't know where you were. I think she's mostly referring to SB 50, the effort that would have forced cities to allow more density around transit and kind of cleared the way for 3 or 4 story buildings. I think that's what she's referring to. What do you think about when you think about an ad like that?
Politics are always about creating differences, I guess, from your opponent. And so it would make sense in some ways for her to distinguish herself from Todd. And so I don't doubt that that's part of it. I also know, and being in Sacramento, we look at the housing crisis, we look at homelessness, and it's so frustrating because people spend so much time pointing at each other. And yet you can clearly see in everybody else's backyard what's the problem, right? So it's easy to be in Sacramento and say, you guys have really bad zoning laws. You've got too many NIMBYs. You've got to build more. How can we force you to do that? And I respect the fact that upsets people, but it's something we have to come to terms with. You can't complain about the rising homelessness or the fact that in so many of those single-family homes you have kids living with their parents. And I'm not talking about 19-year-olds, 35-year-olds and multi-generational households. Sometimes that's okay. I mean, we probably should get used to that. That's not such a bad thing. We live that way. But also there's a need for more housing. And there's a need for more affordable housing. When I see in my district 2 or 3 families living together that aren't related, there's something wrong there. And we've got to rethink how we do how we do housing. And that starts with us. So it's an easy, I think, push. But, in the end of the day, if we're looking about the future of San Diego, we can't continue to have that attitude.
Do you feel like single-family homes and single-family home neighborhoods in San Diego need to be protected?
No. I'm trying to think of what's... Look, I live in a single-family home in City Heights. It's not exactly a single-family neighborhood, if you will, single-family home neighborhood. It's next to high-density housing and cars everywhere and people living on top of one another, and that's okay. I don't...
Back houses in the backyard.
Back houses in the backyard, in the front yard.
Yeah.
A couple people sleeping in their cars out front. We've got the gamut. And I'm not suggesting that La Jolla is going to turn into that. But what I'm suggesting is we have to have responsible development around transit centers. I think that obviously makes sense. We've got to get people out of their cars and into public transit, and that's one way to do it. And we have to be honest with ourselves about the fact that our ideas about, suburbia and having these large plots of land where our families can roam freely and not worrying about where somebody else is going to someday live is probably over in big urban areas. We're a big urban area. It's time to start acting like it.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in what you make of the Democratic mayoral race, 2 Democrats running against each other, sort of being defined on these terms, right? That for the first time, we're going to have a competitive mayoral race that, unless something changes, does not even include a Republican. And the 2 visions for a Democrat that voters get to choose between are one that embraces what you just said. We're a big urban city. The time of us having, playing kickball in the backyard as the image of ourselves is over, and it's time to acknowledge that we're a big city, versus Barbara Bree as, vision of herself as a superhero protecting single-family neighborhoods from speculators in Sacramento. What do you make of those 2 choices of 2 different types of Democrats?
Well, first of all, it doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican. I would ask anyone who would run a campaign like Barbara's choosing to run, which I do understand why she's doing it. Largely, you have to create differences, and this is an easy one to do. But I'd ask her, okay, if not that, then what? What's your solution? And I think that's one of the things that we don't do enough. When people are, and we see it a lot in Sacramento with the Republicans, they'll get up and they'll say, no, this is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible. Okay, then what? And you can't tell me it's just, reducing taxes, or I don't know. I haven't heard what Barbara suggests is the way to go with this. But we need more housing units. People are sleeping in tents. People are sleeping 2 and 3 families to, a 2-bedroom apartment in City Heights. Like, that's not okay. We're in the United States of America, and if we can't do better than that, then who are we? You don't deserve to just say no without offering credible solutions to a problem that we know exists. And so I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican, but in politics in general, this is something that I think is really important and kind of probably got us to where we are. This is why diversity is so important. Not diversity necessarily sometimes but not necessarily of race or gender, but diversity of experience. So, when you're like taught and grew up in a tough situation and actually talked to people and felt and understood what the challenges are to be working class in San Diego, it changes your perspective. And it allows you to not only consider protecting our neighborhoods, which is important, and protecting people's livelihood, that's important, but also understanding that we can't just let people live in a way that's unsustainable. We can't continue to just pack people into City Heights. Mm-hmm. At some point, we run out of space there too. And so I think that you have that perspective, and maybe some of our, I think, longstanding politicians in San Diego, Republican and Democrat, and maybe one running for mayor, didn't have that same kind of broad experience and background.
One of the fronts on this in this race was a email fundraising solicitation that Barbara sent out that said they're coming for our homes. And afterwards, Will Rodriguez Kennedy, party chair, said that it played on basically every ism that exists. Do you think that the nature of the campaign she's running is playing footsie with classism, racism, those sorts of things?
I think it's dangerously close. I don't think Barbara's classist or racist. I think she's a good woman. I think she's trying to do the best, and I think she's trying to create a lane for herself. I just don't know if she is looking at her own material and realizing how it's being seen by other people.
We should wrap up soon, but I do want to ask you about probably the most intense and emotional experience a lot of us watched over the last few months, which was about the anti-vaccine protests and the law you put forward in partnership with others that would, in essence, not only bolster the requirement that kids who go to public schools be vaccinated, but make it more clear and maybe more difficult to get exemptions to that.
Right.
And that produced a tremendous, weird and upsetting experience. I think a lot of us who even got caught up in your Twitter mention somehow got the jet stream of what that was like. But do you, of all the weird stuff you saw with that, did you learn anything about them that you really did come away with about like what they're worried about and what they're concerned about? Or do you think they're all just kind of on an island that you can't touch, that you can't understand?
No, there were 3 individuals who contacted our office for meetings who were opposed in my district. One actually didn't live in my district, but her husband worked in my district, so I took that meeting. One didn't show up when we told her she had to provide her address, because I said I would meet with any constituent. She wanted to bring 4 people who didn't live in the district, and the other came in, and she actually lived in the district, and it is pure fear. And I understand that as a mom, like, you love your kids, and if you are somehow get down this spiral that you can get down in the internet of information that's incorrect, it's factually incorrect, it's scientifically incorrect, it's medically incorrect, but you believe it and truly believe it. I mean, I couldn't help but feel for this mom. And she brought her daughters in, and I just, you just wanted to say, like, what is it that I can do to re-educate you? Because I'm not trying to push a belief. I'm trying to push science, facts. And so I think it was, I took that, and I took a few other experiences and said, I do understand that. Being a mom, I understand that. So that's one group of it. And I don't know how to fix that. And I think that not only with this, but with other issues, we're going to see this more and more with social media and the internet, and how people can kind of not only go down this hole, but kind of self-segregate, so that they had no idea. They had no idea that they're in a minority opinion. They actually think a majority of people feel like them. And, you can see polls and be like, that's actually not. Most people are pro-vaccine, Democrat, Republican, you name it. Most people understand why we have these and why this is so important. Most people understand vaccines don't cause schizophrenia. They don't cause autism. That's been proven. It's not something that we. Well, it was one of the things I heard a couple of times, and I'm like, I couldn't even find it on the internet. And then I also felt very bad for the children, though, because sometimes these parents would talk about their kids in a way that you'd be like, look at your kids. They're beautiful. They're wonderful. They're fine. Like, no kid is perfect. Like, I'm the first to tell you, like, I could, we could all pick out the problems with our own children, whatever they may be. Hopefully we don't parade them around and tell everybody else that that's a problem, And I don't even know if problem's the right word, but what makes children unique and special in themselves. And that kind of struck me as well. That made me very sad, because you want people to understand that. I always use terms, and I know this will not sit well with you, Scott, but I'm pretty religious, and so I would be like, God gave you what they gave you. It's pretty cool, and things that, especially looking at children throughout their livelihoods, things that at first seem quirky or strange end up being some of their best strengths as they grow older, and I think that made me sad. But all that being aside, it was by far the most horrifying cult-like behavior, bullying, ridiculousness that I saw from a mob mentality ever in my life too.
Do you think the Capitol security would have treated protesters from another stripe differently? I
absolutely do. And I've said this. I said it to my colleagues. I said it to Capitol Police. I said it to anyone. I said it on Twitter. If you had a bunch of black and brown folks from my district in the Capitol, and this is what people have to realize, I'm facing people and I'm having to run a meeting with people who the day before were on social media giving me death threats, saying, bring your gun, learn how to use it, and I have to interact with them. They're the public. That's my job. And then they continue to just scream at you, yell at you, bang on the doors, sit in the rafters and literally chant at you, with fingers pointed and screaming and all of this stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, well, let's just carry on till the point where somebody threw blood. I mean, in what world do we get to that point? And I guarantee you, if those were black and brown men from my district upset about something else, that they would have been escorted out of the Capitol a lot earlier. So it was a lot to ask for, I think, for people to personally, and I've got thick skin, I'm like, I'll take a lot, but I've never received so many death threats. I've never received such kind of harassment. And I don't think it's fair to put people through that.
I think sorry. Sorry, that was sorry.
It's okay. I don't even know what's upsetting you, and it's going to make me have an empathy. So,
yeah, there's it was hard to watch people say, just assume that there was something wrong with a lot of the kids that they were worried about, and but I do think there is this spiral you described of people get in when they think if their child's been hurt. And, the government's requiring an injection of something into their bodies. Mm-hmm. And if they think that that's causing this or causing some problems they've had, I can see how it would make them crazy. And not that it would make me crazy. It would be very hard to live in that reality. And I don't know how we get past that. And I don't know what we can do, because I can see why they acted the way they did, because they were, like you said, freaked out. And so So what do we do about that? Or do we just going to assume that they're this population that we can't reach, that we can't be a part of, that are separate, and just hope they don't get bigger? Or is there a way to make that bridge? Because I got really scared watching that I don't know how we can make that bridge. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what to do. What do we do?
I don't know. And that's a good question about a lot of things these days, right? About the divisions that we find ourselves in. And this is a very personal one, but one that I think is projected in a lot of different fields. And a lot, like I said, it's kind of the non-positive things that have happened because of the internet and because of social media. But I've been thinking about that. And I thought about how we treat pregnant women and moms in the hospital. And I think we have to be more honest. And maybe it doesn't do anything because I'm not sure, but I think we have to be more honest with parents, young, especially, while you're pregnant and right when you have a baby, that all of these things can happen, and we don't like to talk about bad things. Your child can actually die for no reason. It used to be that this happened a lot, but we're not used to that, right? Because it happens much less now thanks to things like vaccines. And so we're not socialized to believe that something is going to happen to this little piece of perfection.
And that somebody didn't do it on purpose or was
Or
wrong.
it was caused by something, right? We don't believe that this is just that, this is... that children are born differently and that's it's nobody's fault, because I think too many parents think if something is, and I hate to use the word wrong because nothing's wrong, but if something goes wrong, if something's different, then it's their fault. And it's so much easier to blame it on something else, right? Because you don't want to think I did anything wrong but maybe nobody did anything wrong. And I don't know how to have those kind of conversations in particular, because you do see this overwhelmingly with moms. And most of the anti-vaxxers were moms. How to have that conversation. Now, there are other people, quite honestly, and this is part of the problem, and what we're trying to kind of end with this bill, is there are people making money off of this desperation. And that's what we were seeing. We saw doctors selling medical exemptions. You guys wrote about, a similar situation here in San Diego. And we need doctors to not do that. We need individuals who are writing books and selling movies and talks and, to not be making money off of something that is just creating fear that is irrational. And I hate to use that word, but it's, when you look at science and truth and medicine, it's an irrational fear. You should always, it's hard to say that. I lived every minute of especially my first child, of every minute of my day worrying about what could or would or should happen to her. And every time I saw something that worried me, I'd run to the doctor. And, I get that. And so how do we have more honest conversations without freaking parents out, but to say, you're going to have ups and downs, Yeah. And I'll tell you one thing that I heard a lot of that I do think that there's some sort of way we can position this: seizures. So seizures are really scary. Anybody who's had a kid who had a seizure, febrile seizure or non-febrile seizure, it is probably one of the scariest things you've ever seen. And it's also pretty normal. And so I honestly think that is one example, but the number of women who said, well, my child, 24 hours later had a seizure. It's yeah, but look, your child's really good now. Sometimes the doctors will tell you, we don't know why, but they work themselves out. What are we not doing to educate or inform parents that it's scary and it feels scary and it looks scary, but bodies react and do things to fix themselves. And so that's just a small bit. I have no solutions, and I've been seeking them myself. It's scary.
Well, Lorena Gonzalez, quite a couple of weeks for you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. It's the most popular I mean, really, the most popular political affairs podcast recorded in the area of downtown that Donald Trump visited this week. If you haven't heard about it yet, we have PolitiFest coming up soon. That is the all-day summit dedicated to housing, homelessness, and transportation. Everybody who's anybody in public affairs in San Diego is going to be there. I'm pretty sure it's October 26th. It's an all-day event we put on. We're very excited about the lineup. We will have a live version of this show, a mayoral debate, all kinds of panels about homelessness, about transportation, transit, housing supply, and much, much more. Lots of good stuff. Please see more details and get your tickets at politifest.org. I'm Scott Lewis, editor-in-chief at Voice. Andrew Keatts is assistant editor. Sara Libby is managing editor. And this show was produced by the one and only Nate John, the one and only Adriana Heldies, and the one and only Megan Wood. We will talk to you next week.